Great. So good evening, everyone, or good afternoon, depending where you're from. I'm very happy to see you all here today, and I would like to welcome everyone to tonight's webinar titled Moving Beyond Email in 2024 by Pronto. But first, I'd like to start off by recognizing some of our generous sponsors. First is Learnix, our bronze sponsor. Learnix is a free Google Chrome extension that allows students to document their research journey. As students research, Learnix captures their searches, the sites visited, times on sites, and notes from websites, which can then be exported in an organized notes page, an auto-generated bibliography, or a snapshot report summarizing their journey. You can learn more about them at learnix.com. That's LEARNICS.com. Next is NEDLA's friend, Rod's Pulse podcast. In his podcast, Dr. Rod Murray explores topics related to e-learning technologies. You can find his podcast at rodspulsepodcast.com or anywhere where you find podcasts. NEDLA is a nonprofit organization committed to promoting digital learning for all. If you're interested in becoming a sponsor or a patron, please feel free to email us at douglas.koch@nedla.org. That's douglas.koch@nedla.org. So we're thrilled about our partnership that we have between NEDLA and Pronto, and we're excited to have them on today's webinar. Pronto is an LMS integrated messaging platform built specifically for higher education, with features like individual and group chat, video meetings, captioning, message translation, and read receipts. Pronto gives institutions unparalleled access to their students, ensuring students have access to important resources that will help them throughout their higher education journey. So now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Zach Mangum, the co-founder and the CEO of Pronto.
All right, thank you, Doug. And thanks to everybody for joining us today. As Doug mentioned, I know we've got people, I think, all throughout the country here and spanning all time zones. So for some of you, I realize you may be at the end of your day and start of your evening. My goal will be to try and make this as painless as possible by not taking way too long, covering a whole lot of material we're excited to share with you. But as Doug mentioned, I am the co-founder and CEO here at Pronto, and we provide a messaging service for schools. Our product is used by 3.2 million students. They've used Pronto to send and receive over 63 million messages, and that spans across almost 300 institutions globally. And the reason I share that with you is because a lot of the data we're going to share with you today is proprietary because it originates from our own platform. But we've also done pretty extensive research across the EdTech landscape, particularly as it pertains to messaging and communication solutions for higher education, to be able to provide, I think, some insights that will be useful to you as you look at your institution's goals in terms of communication with students. We have noticed some trends that I don't think will come as a huge shock to you, but maybe the data surrounding them will. And that is that students don't check their email. In fact, students loathe the email. 56% of millennials and 67% of Gen Z rarely or never use email to communicate. They have over 30% of them claim to have more than 1,000 unread emails in their inbox. Of those 1,000 emails, only 1 out of every 8 or so of the emails you send them are actually going to ever get opened. And what makes matters worse is the one email they check or open is probably not going to be read in its entirety because Gen Z has an attention span of just 8 seconds. If you go to the older learners, millennials, their attention span isn't much better. I'm actually a millennial myself. I turned 40 this last summer. And so I'm on the older spectrum of millennials, but our attention span is reported to be about 12 seconds. Sadly, I'm not shocked by that if I look at myself in the mirror. I think that's pretty appropriate. If we send students paragraph after paragraph, which is usually what we'll do when we send emails, it's unlikely to be read in its entirety, and therefore a student will not get the entire message. Now, that leads a lot of institutions, particularly when we talk about communication outside of the classroom, to try other things. we might give students a call. Now, we don't see professors giving students calls, at least not very often. But academic advisors, counselors, financial aid, school administration very often will. Now, one of the problems with this is the obvious, and that is when you call a student using a phone number they don't recognize, they're not terribly likely to actually pick up that phone call. If you then leave them a voicemail, good luck. That voicemail box is probably already full, and they probably never have checked a voicemail ever in their lives. And so you're not having a ton of success that way. And if you're wondering if that's unique to students, just think about your own usage. I'm sure you probably got at least one phone call today. If you're anything like me, I got probably 5 today from numbers I did not recognize and therefore I did not pick up. Now, to add to that problem, 90% of Gen Z is anxious about speaking on the phone. An awkward phone call is one of the top 3 things they'd most want to avoid in life. Now, we did not make that statistic up. It sounds made up, but that's actually from a study that the New York Post did not too long ago. 85% of Gen Z does not view phone calls as being an important function on their phone. Now, what's interesting about this, I have a son who's a sophomore in high school, so I understand he's not quite yet attending a college, but he's close. And if you look at his phone, you look at the dock on a phone, right? And at the bottom of that screen has those 3 to 4 apps that are pinned at the bottom. Well, pre-installed on every device is the phone app icon, right? You go to a sophomore in high school, it's not there. They move it out, they put something like Snapchat in its place, and you have to scroll over like 3 screens just to find the phone app on their phone. 75% of millennials avoid phone calls whenever possible. Again, guilty as charged. So if we are trying to email or to call students to try and get an important message to them, you probably feel from time to time like you're standing in front of an auditorium or a classroom that looks or feels like this. You're trying to talk, you're trying to share something important, and nobody's on the other end, which can be incredibly frustrating. And the thing is you're right. And you've probably recognized the fact that you're right, that nobody is checking these means of communication. So what do? Most institutions resort to SMS. They send text messages to students. Now, there are a variety of ways in which you can do this. You've probably tried at least one of these. The one that I would recommend very least is sending them a text message from your actual phone, right? This is going to fail miserably. And in the times that it does succeed, it actually creates some boundary problems for you personally, especially if you are an instructor as opposed to a school administrator. But either way, handing out your personal phone number to communicate with a large quantity of students creates a reality where you don't have boundaries between your personal life and your professional life. The other problem, though, is it's not unlike sending or placing a phone call. When you send an SMS to a student from a phone number they don't recognize, don't plan on them checking it. Don't plan on them responding to it. Instead, plan on them swiping left and deleting it, or worse, deleting it and reporting it as junk. And that then reports the number you texted them from to cell phone carriers, making delivery rates that much more of a challenge or a hurdle for your institution. So if you're not sending from your personal device, what do most institutions do instead? They generally will license pretty expensive software. There are a lot of different providers out there, even with some specialization in the ed tech or higher education industry. But the problem with some of those solutions is you send through a platform and it comes to the student's phone as, again, an unidentified sender, just a string of digits, right, a phone number, or even worse, a short code. Those short codes flag in the student's mind. It sends a siren that just goes off that says this is spam. In August of this year alone, over 379 million spam texts were sent in the United States every day. If you were to look at the data today, meaning November 29th, 2023, it's actually quite a lot higher. It will be even worse next month, and it will be a lot worse next year than it was this year, because next year is a pretty heated election season that we're expecting, right? But when you get to the end of a calendar year, you're also combating spam that comes from retailers and others who are trying to boost holiday spending. And college students are prime targets for those kind of spam messages. So if in the average kind of summer month, they would receive about 19 or 20 spam texts per month, when we reach the end of the year, it increases sometimes by about double. And so you have to compete with that noise. It's kind of like Times Square on New Year's Eve. A lot of noise. and there isn't a ton of people that you recognize there. And that can be oftentimes the messaging app of choice for a student, their default messaging app. Lots of incoming messages, a pretty large quantity of outgoing messages, but the only ones they're paying attention to are the ones who have a face and a name tied to them. In other words, the sender is in their address book on their mobile device. Now, what we have recognized when we kind of boil down this set of problems for higher education is institutions are very often solving the wrong problem. It's not that they shouldn't solve or you shouldn't solve for student engagement. You should, but you should solve for that second. What you should solve for first is access, actually getting a hold of the student in the first place. If you can't get a hold of the student, your engagement efforts are useless, right? So moving forward, what I'd like to talk to you about is a data-backed preferred way to reach a student, a more successful, more effective way of reaching a student. And that is through what the industry would refer to as a dedicated messaging app. So about 2/3 of millennials and Gen Z prefer using dedicated messaging apps to communicate with their peers and frankly, anybody else. 73% of their device usage is primarily for texting and chatting. So it's not for emailing, it's not for phone calls. They definitely are typing. And what you need to do is send the message through a preferred channel. If you're wondering what a dedicated messaging app is, let me give you a few examples. Just about every student that you may interact with at your institution has at least one, if not all three of these messaging apps, and maybe 2 or 3 more. And they're very comfortable downloading these apps because each serves a dedicated purpose in the student's life. So let's take the first, for example, the default messaging app on their phone. If they're an iPhone user, this is iMessage. If they're an Android user, Android has its equivalent, but this app is reserved for messaging between close friends and family. It's not necessarily for everybody else. Unfortunately, institutions will license tools, like I mentioned before, to become one of the everything else that's bombarding a student's default messaging app. You're not generally welcome as a sender in that app. You're also not welcome in the next dedicated messaging app you'll see on most students' phones, and that's Snapchat. Snapchat has its dedicated purpose in a student's life. It is for friends, acquaintances, even people that a student doesn't necessarily know, but they would like to know or meet. It's for meeting new friends, building a social network, figuring out what's going on this weekend. It is their social outlet, as it were. The next one you'll find on most students' phones is GroupMe. GroupMe is more of a generic dedicated messaging app. It's a catch-all for some of the different group needs, group communication needs in a student's life. Maybe a sports team they belong to, or a club, maybe a community group that they belong to. And those organizations will use GroupMe sometimes as a means of communication there. So in the student's mind, it's very easy for them to compartmentalize their lives and put the communications that are relevant per app into each one of these apps, right? So a paradigm that may feel and sound familiar to you is if your institution uses, let's say, Microsoft Teams. You know, if you get a message in Microsoft Teams at 10 p.m. on a Saturday night, you know a few things for sure, that this is work related. So that message is not from mom, it's not from your neighbor, it's not from your sibling, it is from a coworker. So you've got that compartmentalized and stored away. You can say, I don't have to get to this right now. It's 10 p.m. on Saturday, I'll get to it on Monday. Whereas if you got that message in your default messaging app, you may think, oh, this is probably mom, or my sibling, or my neighbor, or my friend. Maybe I do want to get back to them now because it's my free time now. You see how you can kind of compartmentalize your life. Well, students do this. They just do it on steroids. They have, instead of a couple of apps, they've got like 5 or 6 or 7 apps where they've kind of got their communication in these respective bins. So what we have found, rewinding back just a little bit, I want to highlight this statistic, and that is that messages sent through dedicated messaging apps have a 6.2 times higher open rate than email and unsolicited text messages. There's a couple of reasons why this is true, and I'll point to those in just a minute when I show you a demo of our software. Now, I recognize that that's a little bit self-serving. I want to show you that so that you get some insights into some of those pieces of communication and methods of communication that matter if you actually want to reach the student. But what our platform is, we are one of those dedicated messaging apps. The dedicated purpose that we serve in a student's life is to basically be the default communication platform for everything that happens at school. So we give teachers access to students, counselors, fellow students access to students, and then school administration access to students. And when a student downloads Pronto, they now have their outlet to everybody that can allow them to be successful and more likely to stay retained at that institution and more likely to be successful at that institution. One thing that we do that is critical in our minds, and it's proven to be critical as we've analyzed our data over many years now, is to meet students where they are. So Pronto is not just a mobile app. We have native applications on Android and on iPhone. They're very highly rated as well. But we also install Pronto at the LMS level. That way, when a student is browsing their LMS and they're submitting assignments or working on assignments, they can actually receive and send messages inside of Pronto without ever leaving the LMS. So as an example, you see here, this is Canvas. Pronto actually can be installed at the global navigation, on the global navigation inside of Canvas. And when a student clicks on this link inside of the global nav on Canvas, it will actually launch this chat window right inside of Canvas. That will appear in the bottom right-hand corner of the Canvas screen, and it will follow the student throughout their session inside of Canvas. So if they were to browse to different courses or assignments or other pages on Canvas, they're still able to communicate with their fellow classmates, their professor, their TA, a tutor, and be able to be in sync with everything that's going on there. What I'd like to do is pause for a minute and show you some visuals here. I think you'll find that useful as we cover some of the benefits of a dedicated messaging app. For purposes of just, I think, clarifying a couple of things. I mentioned earlier, I recognize that by demoing our platform, we're being a little bit self-serving here. I hope that you view this as an opportunity to see some of the dynamics of a platform like this so that you can install things that have similar dynamics or paradigms at your institution to greatly enhance or improve your ability to reach a student in the first place. Instead of having 1 in 8 emails bounce and most of your text messages go to delete, instead, let's give students an opportunity to actually view communication at a higher level. So as a preface here to what I'd like to show you, what you see on the left-hand side of your screen is this larger desktop application window, this larger window. I want you to imagine that this is the view of an instructor. Now, there are a lot of different communication types that could take place inside of a dedicated messaging app like Pronto. This example will be an interaction between an instructor and his student, and then several students communicating with one another. On the right-hand side, you see an iPhone screen. This will be the perspective of a student in this example. I've recorded this demo. It helps me kind of keep it a little bit more succinct. I'm going to pause it just one time as we go through it to show you a couple of things that matter. But let me walk you through a quick tour. So in the upper left-hand corner of the screen, you see a Pronto logo. It also says Pronto University. Imagine that being swapped out with your branding. This is just kind of a generic instance here. Then you see the professor's name, Dr. Mangum. So that's going to be me. And I'm this fictitious professor of Intro to Computer Science at this institution. This green dot tells my students, I have the app open. You can communicate with me anytime right now, and I'm likely to get back to you. This tasks and announcement features, we're not gonna go into those today in the interest of time. I can go to these expandable and collapsible sections. These are called categories inside of Pronto, but they're just a grouping of groups or direct messages that I may belong to. So if I click on courses, since I'm an Intro to Computer Science instructor, I can click on that, and you see here to the right is a chat. It's a group chat that includes me and my students. If I have a TA in this course, he or she would also be a member of this. And if I want to communicate with my students and send them a message like, hey, just a reminder that this week's assignment is due no later than midnight on Thursday. If you need help, get help. I can help you till 5 p.m. my TA can help you till 7, and everyone else can probably help you until the assignment's due because they're probably going to procrastinate and wait till the last minute. So I send this along, and note that these little avatars in the bottom right-hand corner start moving around. Those are read receipts. So as a professor, I know when I send something, who saw it and who didn't see it. Immensely valuable to me as an instructor because I want to make sure that students actually get my message. If I were to email them, I send it and then I just hope and pray. I never have perfect certainty as to whether or not somebody saw it in the time frame that I needed them to see it. Now, what you see on the right-hand side for the student's view on their phone, a push notification appears on the lock screen of their phone. This lock screen is an immensely valuable piece of digital real estate in the life of a student. Studies show that students will check this screen, they'll pick up and look at their phone. This screen is seen several hundred times every single day. So if you can penetrate the lock screen, you're in business. If you can penetrate the lock screen with some other details attached to your push notification, you're really, really in business. Let me give you an example of a few things that really matter. Note here that at the top of this push notification, it says Intro to Computer Science. That gives the student a trigger that this is something I recognize, right? If I were to send them a blast through a text messaging service, what would they see? Well, they would see a number, right? They would not know who this is from, and they're going to be suspicious that this is spam, which increases the likelihood of them just deleting it or dismissing it. The next thing that matters here is I see the professor's name, Dr. Mangum. I recognize that name because I'm one of Dr. Mangum's students. I see a snippet of this note saying that he's reminding me about this week's assignment. Again, another thing that I'm going to be familiar with. Also, Professor Mangum's profile image is right there, and a little Pronto app icon, which also increases my recall because I know my institution uses this dedicated messaging app to communicate with me. All of these things signal very loudly, this is for school, this is important, Zach, open it, right? So Zach taps on that push notification, and as you would expect, it launches the Pronto mobile app on his mobile phone. So when he gets into the mobile app, he can participate in the conversation in real time. This is not a static message board. It's very synchronous. It's very live. You'll notice here when Zach types a message responding to Dr. Mangum's message, things start happening. These read receipts start moving around. You see typing indicators. Here, Dylan Griffin is going to respond. You see that that happens, and I know he's typing. So everything is in motion. It increases the likelihood of a student sticking around and not dismissing the app and moving on, but they'll stay present. Now, Dylan says he's happy to help. Zach says, great, thank you. Let's go ahead and get going. Gabriella, a student who may not be terribly comfortable speaking English, sends a message in Spanish, which is no problem. Pronto will translate that into English for the student and for anybody else. By the way, we support 113 different languages. Dylan decides that he's going to create a separate group where Zach, Dylan, and Gabriella can work on this assignment together. He shares it inside of the group for the entire course in case anybody else would like to get help. Now, when Zach, the student here, joins this group, he's now in this group, he, Dylan, and Gabriella, and they can collaborate on this assignment together, and Dylan's going to be generous with his time and help these two on this assignment. He says he's ready when we are, so Zach replies, says that he's ready. Note in the upper right-hand corner, there's this green camera icon. This is a meetings or video conferencing feature. When Dylan clicks on that from his computer, Zach will see a blue banner that appears at the top of his app screen, prompting him to join the meeting that Dylan just started. When he taps on that blue banner, he's admitted into the meeting. He gets an opportunity to decide if he wants to share his audio and video first. He says yes to both. And now he's in a meeting with Dylan. Dylan's on his computer, Zach's on his phone. We can toggle to different views. So you can be in speaker view like this or toggle to a different layout. So a gallery layout here. We can also record this meeting in the event that Dylan maybe shares his screen and walks Zach through some things with this assignment. And Zach wants to make sure that he has that context after the fact and can revisit those notes or the instruction that Dylan gave him. We can view here that Gabriella is observing. She isn't participating with video and audio. When we're done, we simply tap on the screen, hit that red leave button, and we can leave or just end the meeting. And when we end it, Pronto sends us right back into that group that this meeting originated from. So note that there's a replay button on that little asset there that says that Dylan Griffin hosted a meeting. That's because we recorded it. So the three of us could go back to the recording at any time if we want to. Everyone kind of thanks Dylan for his help, and away we go. So this is one example of the type of communication that can take place inside of a dedicated messaging app that is synchronized with your learning management system. One thing I glossed over that I want to reiterate is Pronto can be integrated with your learning management system, or we can actually supersede that and integrate through the CSV files that you utilize from your SIS, your student information system, to populate your LMS, which gives you a little bit more opportunity and things that you can do with Pronto. But the reason I bring this up is to highlight the fact that with Pronto, everything is in constant sync and always updated. And you don't have to manually provision users. You don't have to manually create groups for the courses that exist at your school. And if you want to use Pronto beyond the classroom for things like academic advising, counseling, and so forth, those things can also be automated as well. So let me go ahead and stop sharing my screen. I want to just kind of close here before we get into some question and answer time with some interesting data that I think is worth sharing. And I know that this doesn't necessarily resonate with every institution, but I think it'll resonate with enough institutions that are joining us on this call. And that is that we've had a measured impact on improving student outcomes and helping institutions retain more students. I recognize student retention and engagement may not be this massive challenge for every institution, but we've noted, particularly with two-year institutions, that it's a significant challenge. And we have noted since 2020, Pronto has been able to help schools retain over 137,000 more continuing students. That translates to about 170 million more tuition dollars saved across the member institutions, the customer institutions using Pronto. In the first year using Pronto, a school will retain an average of 11.34 more students. That's about 1.1 million more tuition dollars. We're very proud of the fact that we can kind of validate this. The other thing we're proud of is Pronto costs a tiny fraction of what we save an institution to license. And so we're very grateful that we have been able to create a cost structure and infrastructure with our product that allows us to deliver a product at a very affordable price point, because we know cash is always a challenge, budgets are always a challenge for a higher education institution. Last thing I want to highlight is that we are very, very good at saving you time. Professors especially. Professors have reported that they save an average of 2 full hours communicating with students via Pronto versus using email each day. Most professors on their syllabus, they'll say, email me if you have a question, right? And students, as we mentioned earlier, they don't like email. In fact, they kind of hate using email. They don't check it proactively. They check it after they've sent you an email. They'll then keep an eye on your reply. But if you try and proactively reach out to them, you're not going to have very high success rates getting a hold of them in a timely enough manner for that email to have been the appropriate communication method. Now, often professors will report to us that they answer the same question sometimes hundreds of times, depending upon how large their course is. When they use Pronto, a student will ask a question inside of the group chat for that course inside of Pronto. And sometimes the professor answers it once, or even better, a fellow student or TA answers the question before the professor even had a chance to answer it. And that's great. That's great because the student gets the answer quickly, which is what they demand. Remember, their very short attention span. The other thing that does, it gives an instructor a lot of their life back, a significant portion of their life back, to focus on things that are higher impact and of higher importance. So I want to conclude there and open it up for questions. If you don't mind going to the Q&A panel here inside of Zoom, you're welcome to ask any question relative to Pronto, relative to the data that we shared with you today, relative to dedicated messaging apps or communication methods that students that institutions are utilizing today. I would love to comment and provide responses to any one of those subjects or anything else that you think that would be useful for us to discuss here with the remaining time that we have. While I await some questions to get added to that Q&A queue, I just would add that if any of you have any interest in a pilot of Pronto, we recognize that we're sort of to the tail end of that season as we are in Q4, gearing up for the holidays and taking a little bit of a break. We are used to now for the past 5-6 years now, institutions coming to us in November and December and saying, hey, this is a problem. Reaching students, engaging them more effectively is a problem we're trying to solve at our institution. We would love to test this out, kick the tires for winter or spring semester. We're very comfortable allowing institutions to do that so that you can make an informed decision as to whether something like Pronto is the appropriate fit when you get to the end of your fiscal year this summer. So just wanted to throw that out there in the event that you're interested. We will make sure that a member of our team connects with you just so that you have a point of contact at our organization in the event that you would like to explore that. We'd be more than happy to have a separate conversation with your stakeholders at your institution to make sure you have very specific use cases addressed and very specific questions answered that are regarding your institution. Looks like we have one question here. I can see how Pronto would enable live meetings and communications with students inside an LMS, but I'm wondering how it would work with admin things like advising, counseling, and so forth. Janine, great comment and thought there. Let me touch on maybe one use case. There's many I could touch on, but this one's sort of top of mind. We have been partnered with the Foundation for California Community Colleges for, goodness, probably 3 or 4 years now. So we have roughly 70 of the community colleges in California that run on Pronto. And that's been a really good relationship for us. And with time and really high levels of adoption, that's resulted in some pretty interesting use cases where those institutions are now coming to us and have been for several years saying, hey, it's great, like you just said, that we can communicate with students inside of the classroom much more effectively than we could before Pronto. But we would love to use this platform so that counselors can reach out. And in the state of California, they have this initiative that's called Extended Opportunity Programs and Services. They have a number of different initiatives that help underprivileged students, that single mothers that are pursuing higher education, individuals that grew up in the foster care system in the state of California. They have different constituencies of students that they put high priority on being able to help. And they have a number of priorities and expectations of those students if they're going to receive certain benefits. One of those is that they need to meet with a counselor 3 times per semester. They need to attend workshops. There's different things that they're expected to do. And Pronto has been able to completely change the game in terms of reaching students in extended opportunity programs and services in California. The reason for that is that tends to be an extremely difficult student demographic to reach. If you think about a single mother, for example, she might be going to school and then taking her child to soccer practice or to daycare or something like that, while also trying to maintain employment. And she's on the go. Having a really effective mobile application as the means to reach her is been a lifesaver for those organizations. And EOPS, Extended Opportunity Programs and Services, is just an extension of a counseling department there in California. I highlight that one because Pronto's expanded pretty extensively across those programs at a number of different institutions. But counseling is a very common use case because if you have this kind of scenario where you have broad adoption on a platform like Pronto, any counselor can be given access to the platform as an administrator and can initiate a direct message conversation with any student on campus to check in on them. And instead of emailing them or placing a phone call, they're reaching out to them using a platform that they already use many, many times every single day for their classroom communication. So what it does is it increases your likelihood of reaching the student by about 6.2 times. So that is kind of that's a lot of words, Janine. I'd be really happy to maybe meet with you separately to walk you through some counseling specific use cases and maybe even a demonstration of the product that is more specific to those use cases if you would like. maybe you could just keep an eye out for an email from our team afterwards so that you can request that if you think that'd be of interest. Next question, do students have to opt into Pronto? Let me walk you through what the sort of onboarding experience is for a student, or I guess what it kind of isn't. A student is not expected to go in and create an account. That's kind of a nice thing about Pronto, because we integrate with either your student information system or your learning management system. Every student that is currently enrolled in at least one course at your institution by default has a Pronto account. Pronto will recognize them, so we know their first name, their last name, and all the courses that they are affiliated with. And so when they log into Pronto for the first time, they're in a number of groups already. They're pre-connected to the people that they're connected to in real life because they're enrolled in those courses. So when they download Pronto, they're recognized. We'll call them out by name and welcome them to the app. And so that's a very great kind of first time experience. So what they're doing to opt in, they're essentially just using the app, right? They don't necessarily have to use the app. What causes them to opt in, it's usually actually the faculty that opts in as opposed to the student. So a professor will say, hey, since Pronto is available at my institution, I would like to use it for communication in my course. And then they'll communicate to their students on day one or week one of the semester and say, hey, we're going to be using Pronto to communicate this semester. You can still email me, of course, but that is going to be the preferred means of communication. I need you to check it each day to stay up to date on everything going on in the course. And then the student can either download the app or they can just use Pronto on their web browser by clicking on the link to it in Canvas or using it right inside of Canvas. So they don't necessarily have to download the mobile application. We just find that students far prefer to. We'll let them know that application is available. We find that 80%, a little bit over 80% of all usage of Pronto amongst student users is on one of our mobile apps. That's their kind of preferred means of communicating in Pronto. I hope that answered your question, Janine. If it didn't, please ask a follow-up and I'd be happy to add a little bit more commentary there if you'd like. Any other questions from anybody else? I notice, I think we still have everybody in the webinar here. So if anybody else has questions, please don't hesitate to ask them. You're also more than welcome to just send me an email. You see my email here on the screen if you would like to ask a question that maybe isn't appropriate here for the webinar setting. I'm more than happy to address those, and I'll be very prompt in getting back to you. But I think, Doug, our Q&A panel is pretty quiet from here, so maybe I'll pass the baton back to you.
Okay, well.
Oh, just kidding, Doug. We did have one more right as I said that.
Okay, and I have a question for you after that.
Okay, perfect. Laurel asks here, are there some examples of use cases for recruiting? Oh, I'm glad you brought that up. Yes, there are. So shoot, if we had more time, Laurel, I'd show you a really cool demo. We should probably schedule some time offline, Laurel, to meet maybe later this week or next week, and I can show you some neat things that we've done. So with recruiting, you can create groups inside of Pronto that allow non-matriculated students to join your Pronto instance. And now recruiters, school ambassadors, student ambassadors, and others can engage with those students. You can live stream different events that you're doing, but you can keep tabs with those students that you're actively pursuing and recruiting. We have a number of organizations that are using Pronto for recruiting. In fact, the EOPS departments I was just telling you about, they use it pretty aggressively that way. But we have institutions that use Pronto exclusively for recruiting and outreach. One of the ways in which students are able to gain access to those groups that are for non-matriculated students is through convenient things like web links that will give them access to those groups, and even QR codes. Each group in Pronto has its own unique QR code, and you can govern how liberal the access to that group is as an administrator over that group. So you could say, only students who attend this institution can gain access to this group. And you can say anybody can gain access to this group. So if you're, doing a tabling event at a nearby high school or something like that, recruiting students, you would set that to be open to anybody so that anybody can come in. they opt in. And now what's also great about that is you have a place where you have now captive prospective students, but also Pronto will ask those students for because they're not tied to your LMS or SIS, we'll ask them their first name, their last name, and either phone number and email address. And in order for them to gain access to the group, they'll have to verify that phone number or email address. So it becomes a lead generation tool for you as well. You can export all of that data, import it into your CRM if you wish. So I'm now talking a lot without showing you anything, but I'd love to show you this maybe another time, Laurel, and walk you through it all. It's a quite slick solution for outreach. All right, Doug, back to you with the question. Another one just hit, but maybe it's a little bit longer. So maybe you could ask your question and then I'll get to this other one.
I was thinking, as you're developing this product and you're going through the early phases and you started to launch it and everything like that, and you started seeing people use it, what's kind of like a hack or something you didn't expect people to be doing with this that turned out to be really successful?
Man, that is a really good question. I will tell you that the answer to that question for me has been, without question, using it for use cases outside of the classroom. So we talked about counseling just barely, and we talked about outreach and recruiting. So many of the use cases for Pronto, it really is kind of a Swiss Army knife of a platform. And we built it with classroom communication in mind. And then institutions, when they get really broad adoption, we have an institution in Texas, South Texas College. It's a pretty large institution. They've managed to get close to 90% of their students to use Pronto. And so it is a absolute, it's invaluable to them now because it is so easy for them to get a hold of a student. The way that they achieved that adoption was by getting all the professors to adopt it in the classroom. When a professor says, look, I need you to use this platform. If you ever going to get an A, you're going to need to be plugged into this platform. So it's very easy for them to justify adoption of the platform. But that gives now the institution, from a counseling, advising, financial aid, the list goes on and on and on of the benefits that extend across the campus now. And we didn't really build it for that. It would be fair to say that we had ambitions of going there one day, but the institutions that use Pronto definitely shortened our timeline for getting to that state, that kind of reality that we're in now, where we can support those use cases as well. It's a great question.
Great, thank you.
Let me read this other question. It's a little bit longer, so bear with me. I want to just make sure I capture it all, so I'm going to read it all. From Dana, she says, I am not an educator, but an interested participant working in the private sector. Do you have any data to show the attention span of Gen Z, alphas, and millennials, more for Zs and millennials, as students transition to the business world? Do you see a trend of businesses adopting a platform like Pronto? I'll pause there. I know there's more questions in this. Dana, yes. So we actually have 92 different corporate accounts as well. So pretty extensive use on the business side of things as well in the private sector. Do you have any case studies of working in the private sector? If so, can the platform be customized? If so, do you have results in the reduced timeline to accelerate problem solving? If you have not worked in the private sector or have not seen that need emerge yet, do you think it's only a matter of time since today's students will eventually become tomorrow's leaders? These are great questions. This is kind of exactly our thesis when we started Pronto, is let's start in the classroom, because if we can achieve a kind of critical mass of usage in the classroom, it'll be very easy for a student to take Pronto with them to the workplace. We found that to be the case in higher education. We had a customer in the state of California. I want to say it was Cal State Northridge, maybe, had a administrator that was responsible for being the admin of the Pronto instance at that institution. They decided to leave, and they moved across the country to Boston, and it was one of their first matters of business in their new role at Boston University to get an account with Pronto. And immediately we had almost immediately a 5-year agreement with Boston University. It's been a really fantastic relationship. So it is definitely a tool that people will take with them from wherever they were using it to the next institution, whether that's another higher education institution or to the workplace. Now, this last question here is, how would you help a company bridge the gap and have them transition from being a late adopter to an early one? So, Dana, the maybe last thing I'll comment on that question is, we generally will find, depending on the organization or the business type, that there may be a variety of means of communication. Sometimes the conversation we're having with a business prospective client is different than what we're talking about with an institution, a higher education institution. Usually with schools, we're talking about the inept communication channels that the institutions are kind of stuck with: email, phone, and text message. And all three are woefully inadequate if you actually want to reach the student. So many students are falling by the wayside because they are not being reached using channels that are familiar and expected and comfortable to them. So we kind of have a mismatch in kind of technology adoption preferences and paradigms. In the corporate realm, a lot of corporations, they use things like Zoom pretty extensively. They'll use text message, but when the organization blossoms beyond even just 30 to 50 employees, they generally need to get onto a platform like Pronto. So it becomes really a pretty smooth conversation for us to talk to them about how hard it is to communicate using the tools they have. It's less about reaching and more a matter of confusing and creating kind of a separation of their personal life and their work life. But anyway, I feel like I might be rambling a little bit, Dana, so I'll stop there. But happy to talk to you a little bit more about that if you would like. Question here: is there a module where accumulated tasks are tracked on a dashboard and the group can see in real-time status updates on all open and active tasks? Yes, you may have noticed in the demo that I provided, I skipped over a tasks module and an announcements module just in the interest of time. We do have a it's a lightweight. I'm not going to claim that Pronto is a task management platform, but we do have a lightweight tasks creation and management solution built into Pronto. It's meant to be kind of like a way to create to-do items and reminders for oneself and for others. So you see it used in an academic setting for things like, organizing group work on an assignment or a project that maybe 5 students are working on together, or a professor creating a reminder for everyone in his or her class that this thing needs to be done by this date. Sometimes you'll even see administratively an institution sending things out to an entire student body, reminding them that something needs to be done by a certain date and time. So absolutely, we can support those kind of use cases. There are some usage limitations, but we could cover those maybe in a separate conversation. All right. Okay, I think that, Doug, that probably does bring us to the tail end here. So let me maybe pass it along to you here to wrap us up, if you don't mind.
Sure, great. So thank you, Zach, very much for this presentation tonight. And thank everybody who's here for attending. Before we end the event, I'd like to recognize again our sponsors, Learnix and Rod's Pulse podcast. Finally, I would like to direct everyone to our website, www.nedla.org, to sign up for the next webinar. NEDLA presents Leveraging Artificial Intelligence to Create a Classroom to Support All Learners by Dr. Katie Nieves Lequinco. The webinar will take place on December 12th, just about 2 weeks. So thank you very much, and have a great night, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Doug.
Yeah, thank you.